welcome back to Crosspolitic. We are very grateful today to have with us Steve Deace, nationally syndicated radio host, heard each weekday in top markets from coast to coast. At least that's what it says.
He's somebody important.
Top market.
He's important.
We're bottom market. Steve's a top market.
Absolutely.
Hold on. I'm not even done yet, you guys.
Okay.
The national media recognize Deace as an influential voice in his home state of Iowa.
Okay.
That's next to Idaho, isn't it?
It's the other.
Yeah.
It's next to Ida Pimp, guys.
Oh, he's ready for Crosspolitic, guys.
Iowa, of course, is famous, being the first in the nation presidential caucuses. He's frequently quoted in the national media on political and cultural issues. Deace has also appeared on all the major cable news networks and writes for the Washington Times, USA Today, and Conservative Review. Of course, Deace lives in Idaho with his wife, Amy, and their 3 children. We're so glad to have you on the show today, Steve.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys. Thank you very much.
Steve is the author of A Nefarious Plot, just dropped back in February.
Yes.
And as well as Rules for Patriots, How Conservatives Can Win Again. Steve, we wanted to start off by just asking you a little bit about this crazy last year. I'm sure you have many, many thoughts for us, but one of the things that we noted that I think has been something of a splash for you was the fact that early on you endorsed Ted Cruz, and and then, of course, things went crazy. Trump ends up getting the nomination, and then finally it seems like maybe perhaps after tons of pressure or something or other, Cruz caves, endorses him, and then my sources tell me you completely threw the towel in with the Republican Party. So tell us about this. What happened in your mind, and where do you stand, and where do you think conservative Christians, how should we read what's going on?
Well, I think that, in my line of work, gentlemen, I have 2 separate vocations, and sometimes they mingle and sometimes they don't. And, on one hand, my number one goal in my career is I want to do whatever I can do with the talent and the platform that God's given me to make a biblical worldview mainstream in America again. And because I think all we have to do is let the lion out of its cage, and it will defend itself just fine.
Come on,
okay,
now.
so
Amen.
so that's my one goal. But on the other hand, though, I am also an activist and a consultant, and I've been involved in a lot of elections and involved in this process professionally. And part of that is to analyze data and analyze trends and situations. And as much as possible, it's when Jack Nicholson was asked in As Good as It Gets why he writes women so well. And he says, I think of a man and then I remove all logic and reasoning. When I do that professional side of things, I remove my advocacy as best I can. I remove my allegiances, my emotions. And so sometimes that requires me, in order to maintain the credibility of that gig, I have to give opinions that I would prefer not to be true.
Right.
I have to say things that I believe are true, even though if wishes were horses, in my case, they would not be. And so, you asked me about Ted Cruz. We are very good friends. We spoke even just this week. I think he's a tremendous patriot. That's my personal feeling. My professional assessment in the decision he made to go along with Trump here at the end is I think he made a tremendous politically professional miscalculation.
Yeah.
And I think the way that you have seen him panned for it and lampooned for it, and the verbal gymnastics he has to walk, he was in my home state of Iowa just a couple of days ago, and he refused to refer to the nominee by name and things of that nature. And so but I say that also understanding there really wasn't an ideal solution for him. I mean, if he never endorses him and Trump loses by a couple of points, they're going to look for it and blame him because even though that's phony, because this isn't 1987. There's not just a block of people, and when you endorse, you just automatically bring this block of people like mind-numbed robots to vote for you. The beauty of social media is people are more informed now, and the nightmare of social media is people are less informed than they've ever been before, but they're convinced they're more informed. Okay, so all right, so everybody has an opinion now, and you don't just control blocks of people like you did 20 years ago. So I don't think there. I can't imagine there were too many Cruz voters that that just sit around thinking with their thumbs up their sphincters thinking, I was going to sit this thing out until Ted Cruz spoke. So I guess I've totally changed my mind.
Right.
But that would have been the perception post November 8th that probably would have driven a stake through his heart. So I know why he did it. I just think that if he was going to end up doing it anyway, there were some things he could have done in advance that would have navigated the process ahead of time that would have made this less disastrous than it turned out.
I think there was a bunch of us that I think when he didn't actually endorse Trump at the Republican National Convention,
we were standing with him.
We were really impressed.
Yeah.
I mean, and then to go and then flip it completely, I'm like, I'm out.
Steve, do you think, because Ted endorsed Donald a week or two before Donald's 2005 comments came out.
Yeah.
Do you think if Ted would have waited like another week, that all that pressure would have been off him anyways?
I don't think there's any question about that. Yeah. Now, I think there'd be pressure on him right now because we have this illusion that the polls are closing and things of that nature. And we can get into, if you want with your audience, I don't want to get into the weeds, but I know a lot of people don't understand how polling works and what the process is. So there's this illusion right now because we took a bunch of polls when the news was about the worst for Hillary Clinton that she could hope for on Friday or a week ago Friday with the Comey letter that the polls are tightening. You got to keep in mind that people respond to polls when they're energized and they don't respond when they're demoralized. So why were the polls that overinflated Hillary's lead after the debates? Those were overinflated because Trump performed so poorly in the debates that his base was too demoralized to respond to pollsters, and Hillary's was excited. Right. And now, since last Friday, Hillary's base was a little demoralized by the Comey letter, and so you're seeing the polls are reflecting that. I still don't believe there's much of a chance Donald Trump will win for reasons we can get into or not. But we can. I don't want to get too far in the weeds because I love talking theology too. So I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
We're getting into theology.
Well, see, Steve, you just happened to jump on the show the day that we actually happen to be pulling Christian cards. So we're actually checking to see who's Christian today. And so my main question for you is, I want to know, what do you think the gospel is?
I think the gospel is, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whomsoever will believe in him will not perish, but have eternal life. For God did not send his son into the world to condemn the world, but so that through him the world may be saved.
Amen.
That's orthodox.
Well, you just quoted a bunch of scriptures, Steve. So how does one partake of that gospel message?
Ask me more specifically what you mean by partake.
Assume that I'm a sinner right now, don't believe in Jesus Christ. What would you tell me?
What I would tell you is that you have to come to grips with the fact that you are a sinner. You are not basically good. For those who believe human nature is basically good, every theology class I've ever taught at my church, I always have everybody raise your hands because everybody's been worked over by progressivism, right? So everybody thinks human nature is basically good. And I said, really? Okay, so for the next 2 seconds, I want you to think of the person in life you hate the most and only think really nice things about them. And you're out after half a second. You're done. Okay? Human nature is not basically good. Therefore, you have no means to overcome your own sinfulness, to overcome the things about yourself that you are ashamed of, the things that you are doing to others that you are ashamed of, the things people have done to you that have caused shame, that have shamed them, that you are now struggling with. You have no power within you to overcome those things, to endure those things, to become a better person simply in your own steam because of those things. And that's where the power of the gospel transforms people's lives. And I just look at my own life. When we started going to church after our first child was born, and
when was that?
That was in 2000. Anna was born in February of 2001.
Oh, wow.
And about 7 or 8 months later, I just remember, I had really wrestled with God about this for months. But I mean, we were living in a 2-bedroom apartment at the time. And in the second bedroom, which we had to turn into her nursery, was kind of my playroom. And in there, I had my video games and my really cool porn collection. I was your typical Gen X guy in the late 90s, early 2000s.
Wow,
and,
wow.
And I remember I walked into Anna's room, and I grew up with a very abusive stepdad. My mom was 15 years old when she had me. We were on welfare when I was a kid, so I know all these. I lived this life.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, this kid is doomed with me as a dad. This might be the one thing Hillary Clinton's right about. It's going to take a village to raise this kid. Okay. And And so after months of wrestling with this, I finally went to my wife and I said, I know this is going to sound strange coming from me, but I think we need to join a church. Not because we need it. We're fine, of course. But she needs she needs like better friends and a more support network than we have. And my wife looked at me and said, I've been thinking this all along. I just knew better than to bring it up to you. So yeah, let's do it.
Wives.
Good woman.
I had been heavily involved in conservative politics all my life, going back to high school, college, as an adult. So I didn't know anything about theology, but I knew like the National Council of Churches and the World Council of Churches were a bunch of Marxists and that kind of stuff. So I went online, and any denominations that belonged to those groups, I eliminated them right away because I didn't want to debate politics at church and Marxist policy and social justice warriorism at church. I just wanted to go to a church that was going to provide some moral nourishment.
You eliminated your churches first based off politics.
Yes, I did. Yeah, that's all I knew.
Yeah, right.
And then we took suggestions. I was doing a sports talk radio show here locally in Des Moines at the time, and I had people email in their suggestions of where they think I should go to church.
Oh wow!
And we went and checked a lot of them out, and I asked every pastor that one question you guys have all gotten from that one person who thinks they're the first one to think about it. Well, what about this one Aborigine in the middle of nowhere that no missionaries have ever met, and if he dies saving a busload of school kids, giving his life, and he's never repented of his sins, did God send him to hell? That's not right. That's not fair, right? You guys have all been asked that question a million times by smart alecs like me, right?
Oh yeah.
And one pastor had an answer that floored me, but it was very simple. He said, I trust that a God who would spare not even his own son for me would deal with such a person with justice.
Amen.
And that floored me in its profound simplicity. And so we ended up going to that church.
Yeah.
And I got baptized and stuff a few months after we started going, but it was sort of an intellectual exercise really for me. Yeah. And then one day, my wife, it was different. She got immersed in, discipleship and stuff right away. And I kind of resented it that she was like ahead of me, So then my pride was like all hurt. So I was like, really pouting at that point. And one day they ran a crawler on the screen at church, for guys to take this bus caravan to Promise Keepers in Kansas City, Missouri on September 18th, 2003.
Wow.
Yes.
And I just had this overwhelming feeling like no matter what else is happening on planet Earth that day, I need to be there for that.
Mm-hmm. Huh.
And we get on the bus to go. The day arrives, we get on the bus to go, and I really didn't want to be there. I'm thinking this is kind of lame. I shouldn't have never done this. And so I did like the universal guy sign for leave me alone. I put my earbuds in my ear, didn't talk to anybody, And I'm sitting in the very back of the bus, and by now my sports talk show has gotten really popular in the community, so a lot of people know who I am.
Yeah.
And this one guy is sitting in the seat ahead of me. About 20 minutes into the trip to Kansas City, he turns to me, taps me on the leg. I look at him like, "Don't bother me, leave me alone." And he taps me on the leg again. And he says, "I know this is going to sound really weird, but I really feel like I need to tell you something." I'm like, "Okay." And he starts telling me about his porn habit and how it led to affairs, and he nearly lost his family. Wow. And I'm like, dude, who the hell are you? Who are you? Well, I don't want to know this.
Overshare.
But within the next 45 minutes, you know what? We ended up, by the time we arrived in Kansas City, we were like blood brothers. Huh. I mean, wow. It was amazing. And then we got to the arena, and they started playing music, and guys are up holding hands, and I'm like, this is a freak show. Hell to the no. I'm not doing this.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And the first speaker was a guy named Joe White. And Joe is building like these life-size crosses on the stage, and he's talking about Christ and the two criminals that were flanked next to him on each side, and he parlays that into a sermon about the damage that fathers did to their sons. And I grew up with a biological that didn't bother and a stepdad who was very abusive, so this really hit me, cut me to the quick.
Yeah.
And I remember, and I'm looking around, at this message, and I'm like, who told this guy I was coming? Because this whole sermon is like about me.
Yeah.
Wow.
And at the end, he takes an altar call, and I really felt like I should answer this. And then I realized that altar calls were only for really bad Pentecostal television with that gal that looks like her hair lost the fight with the paintball gun. So I said, no, I shouldn't do that. And so I sat back down, and I'm like, and at that time I weighed about 370 pounds, so I was like well over 100 pounds ago. And so I set my fat butt down, and I'm like, no, I'm not giving in. The next thing I know, guys, straight up, I was in the upper deck of Kansas City's Kemper Arena when that happened, The next thing I remember is I am face down on the concrete floor in that arena, crying my eyes out at this altar call.
Wow.
And and my wife would tell you ever since that day. Now, I have certainly not been perfect by any means, but she's on her second marriage, and it just so happens the guy had the same name both times. So there you go.
So Steve, it sounds like that God's transformed your heart, and it sounds like you're a Christian. So I'll give you the pass this time. Okay.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You get the card.
Hey, and I want you to know if I'm ever there in Idaho, I have that one chip in my forehead and also in my hand that they gave me when I was at that event. Oh, I'm sorry, that was something else.
Well, here, we got you for a few more minutes, but I really want to it seems like you have your finger on the pulse right now of the election and what's going on culturally. And so you already know that there's a lot of people out there that are feeling very uneasy about this election.
Very discouraged.
So they're paying attention to it, is what you're telling me.
That's right. And so right now, if you could just take the next couple minutes and give us some good marching orders for what to do if we actually get Hillary as a president or if we get Trump as a president, or does it even matter if we get either one of these guys?
I've said this on my show the other night. I really don't care who wins. And I say this as someone who has fought against Hillary Clinton's ideas my entire adult life. And I say this as somebody who knows Donald Trump personally and was one of the first people he tried to woo into his orbit. In fact, I've kind of blamed myself for some of this because I introduced him to some of the people that helped launch his campaign, not
Get him,
knowing
guys.
clearly
Get
he was capable of.
Cut the line.
And I'm serious, guys. There have been nights I've sat up by myself just praying in the chair in our living room in front of the picture window, just despondent over this whole thing. Yeah. So I get it.
Yeah.
So I think the answer is the same regardless of who wins. It's just a different problem. If Hillary Clinton wins, she is going to use the coercive force of government to do everything she can to diminish the influence of the church even more than it already has. You're going to see there will be more Kim Davises. What happened to Aaron and Melissa Klein, Kelvin Cochran, just Barronelle Stuntsman, run down the names, will be legion under Hillary Clinton.
Wow. Yep.
If Donald, so you're going to have to fight for the right to live out your Christian values as a believer as you never have before. But if Donald Trump wins, you're going to face a different existential problem. You will have to fight for the integrity of those values in the first place. And if you look at the way he has corrupted so many Christian leaders, you look at the way you literally had Jerry Falwell Jr., the president of the largest evangelical institution on this planet, go on national TV a month ago and say, I'd vote for a groper. I thought JFK sexually assaulted people and he cut taxes, so I'd vote for him.
Oh my goodness.
Now, if Donald Trump can get Robert Jeffress and James Dobson and Jerry Falwell Jr., men of that stature, when he was just a candidate and it never looked like he was going to win, right? But if the allure of that power caused men like this to beclown themselves and debase themselves, what do you think he could get them to do when he had actual power? When he could say to Jerry Falwell Jr., would you like to be the ambassador to Israel? Right. When he could say to James Dobson, how do you think about retirement in Barbados where you and Shirley can be the ambassador there? What do you think of that? Right. When he has real power to dispense, real favors to woo people, what do you think he will get them to do then? And what I have seen is involved in a lot of Christian political activism all over the country is I see this generational divide, and I'm right in the middle of it. And what I have seen is if you are 50 and older, and not always, but chances are you probably think if Donald Trump doesn't win, America is over because somehow God can't fix the country without his help.
Right.
Now, if you're 40 and younger, you're looking at your parents and grandparents like, WTF? Really? I mean, come on, man. Yeah. I mean, you're like that skit on ESPN before Monday Night Football. You're looking at your parents like, come on, man. Really? I mean, seriously? This is what we're doing now?
You don't have much longer to go, but we do.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, you're looking at your parents like they just bowed down to the chocolate bunny in that video they made you watch when you were a kid.
Yeah.
So
yes.
And then there's those of us in the middle who are hearing it from both generations in one ear and out the other. We have to win. Who cares if we win with it? And the reality is this is exactly what I'm talking about. There is a generational schism that is happening here. And we already have enough troubles as it is of attracting millennials to our churches. And now they're going to watch us literally we're going to literally say Trump is Nebuchadnezzar and Cyrus, bloodthirsty dictators of antiquity, and call that a compliment. Okay? That is terrible branding for the church. Now, that doesn't mean, by the way, that our young people don't have to be confronted with being an adult. That in the adult world, you don't always get to make the ideal choice. You don't always get to make the perfect choice. And it's not fair to backseat drive generations when you know how everything plays out, and they didn't at the time. However, the older generations better take real, when you have people on CNN saying yesterday, Trump has God's character. He is God's anointed.
I saw some of that. Yeah.
I hope we understand that we are helping heretics like Rob Bell and Campolo and Sider. We are helping their recruiting efforts once they get out of our evangelical homeschools and out of our suburban megachurches and they get there on those college campuses with those fake youth ministries. We are helping them rope the wind with our children with this kind of selling out for these politicians. I hope we realize that.
Give me some hope, Steve. I want some hope now.
So give us.
We're depressed.
Give us,
Here is the hope.
Yes.
You know what? Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God.
Come on, Steve.
That's it.
Preach.
Same thing, man. Same thing. Do the same thing. Whether you're some Puritans on a rickety Mayflower risking your lives to come here. The same thing. Whether you're singing "Swing Low, Sweet Charity" because people think because you're a different color, you're not really my Christian brother, and I can treat you as subhuman. The same thing. The same thing that all of our brothers and sisters have had to do for the last 2,000 years.
Good word.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. It's the same thing. We are not entitled to some nationalistic birthright. And that's not what this country is about. And the fact that many people think that way is why we're going to lose it.
Seems like central to that, too, is you touched on this with your point about power. The way of the church has always been a different kind of power. The power of the Spirit isn't the power of politics. Right. Isn't having your hand on the steering wheel. It's actually doing what's right, no matter what, saying the truth, no matter what.
Voting right.
Yeah, just do it.
No matter what.
No matter what. And just trusting that God, and by the power of his Spirit, he's going to bless it long term.
And obviously, we haven't been doing that.
I think that's called faith. Yeah. I think that's
called
faith.
I mean, and it's obvious that we haven't been doing that, guys.
Yeah.
Because look at who we have as our leaders.
Right. Yeah.
No, this is clearly a wake-up call.
Yeah.
I mean, God is literally saying to us, seriously, you're going to do this again. I gave you the most obvious wicked people I could possibly find. And you still persist in taking one more trip around the mountain. This is, God loves us too much to let us have our idols.
Yeah.
Man.
And I've preached this to my own church here in Des Moines. I'm on the preaching team here. And I've said this several times during this election because we're a very politically organized and active church, like many of them are here in Iowa for the caucuses. And I've looked at many of the older saints that really believe if Trump doesn't win, somehow we're all speaking Arabic next month. Okay. and I have said to them, it's one thing to vote. It's one thing to say Hillary Clinton has a proverbial gun to my head, so I'm going to vote for the person who has the best chance of beating her. I don't think that's immoral at all.
Yeah.
But your proclivity to elevate him to some Cheeto Jesus status he does not deserve.
Yeah.
Okay. That is idolatry. And I promise you that don't force God to make it plain. The tighter you clutch those idols, the more painful it will be for him to pry your fingers away from them.
Yep.
All right. So if elections are really just a utilitarian composition, and it's really not a moral choice, and we're not electing a pastor, Steve. And I always come back to people with, I don't know, if you've seen the State of America's pastor, it looks like we are electing some pastors, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But if this is a functionary choice, like choosing the best auto mechanic, and you don't care if the guy's got a tongue ring, but he knows his way around a carburetor, if that's all that it is, then treat it as such. But when you make him a hero, when you send me, and when I've been besieged with emails telling me that he is God's anointed, that I am opposing God's anointed, you guys think I've got an ego problem. I don't think I'm that powerful, okay, that I can oppose God's anointed.
Right.
All right. But when you elevate him, you are an idolater, not a voter. God will not bless that.
That's right.
He will not. He will not share his glory with another. If you want to say, listen, I've got a flawed choice here. There really isn't a good one. I'm like a Bonhoeffer. I'm going to make the best choice in a fallen world I can and trust God's goodness from there.
Yeah.
Fine.
Right.
But that's not what people are doing. No. They are fawning over him on a level that is frightening for the church, if you ask me.
Steve Deace, everybody, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
You can find more at stevedeace.com. Of course, you can tune in every weekday on the Steve Deace Show at 9 p.m. Eastern Time.
Find him on Twitter. I'm finding you on Twitter, brother. We're going to hang out on Twitter. I like you,
I would
Steve.
love that. I would love that.
All right, brother.
I need to probably be on Twitter. Twitter is dangerous for me because Mouth right works faster than brain, and Twitter encourages that.
Hey, thanks so much, Steve.
Thank you, guys. God bless you.